Hey, Melissa.
Hey, Amy.
So we just did a recording or an interview with Mary McFarlin. And originally, Melissa and I met her at IDA.
Yes, back in October
Yeah,
of 2024.
little while back. And she is way into morphology. And in fact, one of her Facebook groups is the Morphology Teachers Hub. And it's a great resource. If you're somebody who uses Facebook still, it's a great resource. And people are continually adding to it. And there's some major researchers that are on there that interact on there quite a bit.
Oh, yeah. She was telling us about those people that are on there. And can you remember some of the names of the people who she
I
had
want to say
mentioned?
she said Pete Bowers was the one that stuck out.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's right. Yes. So she is a gem. She was very involved with the process of trying to help educators understand the benefit of morphology and gave us a lot of great tips through this podcast. So everybody's got to listen, make sure they understand how important morphology is. But she spent like 20 years educating students. She's been around for quite a while, and her original training was through the National Institute for Learning Development.
Yep.
She spent a number of years working as a professionally certified educational therapist and now specializes in structured literacy as a series certified structured literacy dyslexia specialist.
Yep, absolutely. And she talked about her training in Wired for Reading in the advanced morphology. And just listening to her, I got smarter.
Yes.
Put that out there. Just what she knew, it really helped increase my instruction and be more strategic. Morphology, guys, by the way, is not just for older kids. You can start with those advanced morphology pieces in the Latin and Greek layer of language, according to what Mary was saying, in fourth grade. So don't be afraid to do that with your fourth graders on up. Yeah, so she was great. She was wonderful.
I really enjoyed it. And I can't wait for people to hear this because not only did she talk about fourth grade, but she talked about affixes. So, suffix S, suffix ing. We know as therapists, we start teaching that very early on. So she just was a wealth of knowledge, and I cannot wait for people to hear what she had to share.
Same thing. And she's just so sweet and so kind and so generous.
Yes.
Time. We really appreciate that she came on the show twice now to do this.
Yes. So let's get into the show.
Awesome. See y'all. Bye.
Bye.
Hi, this is Amy
and Melissa. We are a couple of retired Texas teachers who are CALTs, certified academic language therapists. We started our own businesses, and now we have a podcast called
The Dyslexia Duo. So join us for our informative podcast, where we'll delve into dyslexia, covering the topics that affect parents, therapists, teachers, practitioners, and anyone who wants to learn more. We'll guide you through everything you need to know, from the first signs to the intricacies of dyslexia curriculum placement and beyond.
This season, we will cover the referral process, what to expect when your child or student is dyslexic, the generational impacts of dyslexia, and how to support those affected.
Come join us. So this is Amy.
And Melissa.
And we're the
Dyslexia Duo.
All right. So today we have a very important guest. You may be on her Facebook page. And I looked at it. I look at it all the time because it's got so much good information about morphology, but she's just a font, a wealth of knowledge. So we have on here today, Mary McFarlin. So Mary, will you introduce yourself to our audience today?
Thanks. And nice to see you again, Melissa and Amy. And thank you for inviting me to be on the podcast. My name's Mary McFarlin, and I live on a small island right near Seattle, Washington in the USA. And I have been working with students in the literacy capacity for almost 20 years. I started out in residential treatment and within the juvenile justice system. And when my own daughter in the early 2000s had some learning needs, I was witnessing the profound impact her therapy had on her. And I totally switched gears. And originally I thought, well, I'm moving to an island. At the time we lived in the big city. I thought, well, I better get trained in this. I might need to work with her. And it turned out I just fell in love with it. And the rest is history. I started my private practice. And so, like a lot of people, I got into the field after seeing how much the structured literacy and learning intervention helped my own child.
So talk a little bit. What's the name of your Facebook group? Because I'm always on there looking at stuff.
Oh, great. So the Morphology Teachers Hub, it's a group I started probably about a year and a half ago. And just kind of thinking, there's got to be others out there. I'm an interventionist, but I'd love to be interacting with teachers and parents and other tutors, just everyone, and hopefully some experts. And sure enough, there's a lot of attention right now, and it garnered a lot of interest. And I don't know how algorithms work, but it's growing every day. And we've got some great experts that have joined the group and are quite active, such as Pete Bowers, Sue Hagelin, Tim Rasinski's in the group. So it's been a really fun endeavor. And it's really evolving into a great resource, I hope, for people. And a lot of people are looking for resources, tips, that sort of thing. So I try to share a lot of the existing free recordings that are out there. Every time I'm on a lot of lists. So when I get them, I share them. And then people can also ask questions. That's been really nice. Like people ask questions about words, and there's great responses, and people are very respectful and kind. And it's so far, it's been a great experience.
You do have a lot of cool resources on there. I've looked through there myself, and I was appreciative of the free resources that you have, because so many times as educators, we just have to spend and spend and spend, and nobody's really reimbursing us for those expenditures. So it's really nice to have free resources on, this really valuable part of our language system.
Right. Yeah. So great.
Let's kind of get down to the nitty gritty. So let's talk about what is a word, because morphology is going to play into that a little bit, but can you define what a word is?
Yeah, so a word itself would carry meaning, like specific meaning. You could actually look it up in the dictionary. Recently, I looked up the word right, R-I-G-H-T, and it has 4 different parts of speech. So really, a word has its meaning within the context of a sentence. You could have your right hand. You could write something when it fell over. So there's lots of different applications for words, but those are specific meanings of that word. And then morphology, of course, comes into play because a word can be a single morpheme.
Okay.
So you said a word can be a morpheme. So what are some examples of that?
Well, that word right, for instance, R-I-G-H-T. Or how about, let's take the word W-R-I-T-E, a different form of right. It's a free morpheme on its own. It can stand alone as a word. We could add a prefix onto that word. We could add re, and now we have the word rewrite. We could add the en suffix. Now we have the word rewritten. So when I refer to a base word, I refer to the smallest word within the longer word. And when I refer to a base element, that would be the free or bound base element. And the element word really represents the written meaning. I kind of borrowed that from Sue Hagelin. When we talk about a base element, that's the written representation of the morpheme.
Can you explain to everybody what a free morpheme and a bound morpheme is?
So a free morpheme would be like that word R-I-G-H-T. It stands on its own, carries its meaning on its own. And a bound morpheme would require more added to it. An affix would need to be added. So for instance, we could have the free morpheme build, right? And we could have the word rebuild when we add that prefix re. Whereas a bound morpheme with a similar sense of meaning would be struct, S-T-R-U-C-T. That is a Latin-based element that we don't say, oh, I'm going to go struct today. That is a bound element that contributes to the word's meaning. When we add that prefix re, we could add a suffix ion. There's lots of different things we could do with it. And so those are kind of the classifications for those bases within words.
So struct isn't so much a morpheme. It's more of an element.
Well, it is. It is a morpheme. So some people would say it's a Latin root, right? There's various ways of talking about these elements. Those base elements carry most of the meaning, right? Struct would be a morpheme, though. I mean, it's, the morphemes are those meaning units. It is its own meaning unit. So, but they carry more of a sense of meaning. I think, reading Sue Hagelin's materials would really explain that in a really well-spoken manner. But that's kind of the gist of it. So struct is a morpheme. It's bound, though, because it has that sense of build. but it's only
Mhm.
a word when we add a prefix or suffix or one. As we know, words can have multiple prefixes, multiple suffixes, but that bound base there of struct carries the heaviest meaning within the word.
So like instruct would be make it a complete word.
Right.
Mhm.
And then, of course, the meanings, those senses of meanings can be pretty transparent, like construct, right? I'm going to construct my Lego tower, right? That's a very
Mhm.
strong sense of that build concept. And instruct, though, I do like to, those conversations are fun to have with students because, oh, what does that have to do with that sense of build? Well, you're kind of building in the knowledge, so it's kind of fun to talk about. But definitely some of those base elements are less, there's some are more transparent than others. And it depends on the words. And as words evolve over time from their origin, the meanings can be pretty far removed from the original concept.
I've definitely found that in my instruction when I've taught some morphological components. I've definitely found that I can go down a rabbit hole, and sometimes it feels like the meaning gets so misconstrued. And then
Yes.
I'm thinking, am I even teaching this right? I go through
Right.
this self-doubt.
Right. Well, and recently there was a discussion on the Facebook group about the word contentment, right?
Mhm.
So does that base element T-E-N-T in that word, does that have the sense of hold, like tame? Is that a form of tame? Or is that stretch, like a form of tend? And the responses people gave were actually really neither in that word.
Mhm.
Right. And I thought that was interesting. So, but I think the discussions are really fun. And when I introduce my individual morphemes in my core lessons, I do give more transparent words to start with. So the kids can kind of start thinking, but then we also point out sometimes that meaning is not super strong within the word. But there's some great discussions around it. And I think it is a great idea to start with those more transparent ones. I could go on and on. There's so many fun words to discuss. And I do like to get the kids involved in that. And they really enjoy it too.
So understanding etymology, right, would support morphology, correct?
Sure. Yes. And in fact, in the sense of word origin, I actually use it to organize my entire instruction. I only work with grades 3 and up. When I'm talking about my particular morphology program that I developed, I'm using that Latin layer of language, and it's recommended for 4th grade and up. So, but when you're talking about spelling in particular, in my original morphology training, I learned that, in Latin-based words, we don't have the letter K. Well, that's a great help for students to know when they're going to spell the sound, what's their spelling option, right? And keep in mind, some words could have a Latin element, a Greek element, and an Anglo-Saxon element, right? It's not that straightforward, but it's a helpful hint. I'll have a student spell the element tract, and I can see them doing it. And like they start, is there a K? And they're like, well, no, this is a bound Latin element. There's no K. And then they know exactly what to put. And there's not a double O in Latin. So if they hear that oo sound, it's usually going to be the letter U. They also realize kind of quickly most of the syllables in these Latin-based words are open, closed, and final E syllables. Not all of them. There are some varieties in Arkansas. Yeah. So once I actually sat down and counted them all of the ones I teach. And I have it written down. And kids are like, oh, once they realize that, and the way we teach these affixes in particular, and then, after a while, they just know. So that's back to the etymology. That's knowing that's Latin layer language. And of course, when we get to that Greek layer, just yesterday, one of my students was reading the word rhythm. And I, pointed out that RH, and that is, we're going to find that in words like rhombus, and a lot of those Greek patterns like PH, right? Which students learn early on. But some of the other ones like PS, like in psychology, or CH, they learn that one early on, like school, SCH. And those are that Greek layer. So once they learn these, that word origin is really helping them with their spelling.
So I think it's interesting because I heard you say the Latin roots should be taught from grades 4 and up. That's when you started working.
Oh, I think other teachers do teach them earlier on. For sure they do. But what was happening in my own practice is my referrals were older students, right? And when I do have a younger student, I do incorporate morphology right away. But my particular materials that I developed within my morphology kit, the vocabulary level is going to be a 4th grade and up level. These are for students that have already had that phonics progression, hopefully have had an introduction to morphology and the suffixing conventions of English. It's the Latin layer of language that are these academic words. We're talking about the tier 2 vocabulary words. And so the materials themselves. So even if I have a fourth grader that's had some morphology, it's still appropriate because there's all sorts of activities that they're doing around word families and complex spelling patterns.
I think it's interesting. One of the dyslexia curriculum, all of our dyslexia curriculum have morphology, but especially Greek and Latin towards the end of the curricula. And there's a lot of districts out here that will drop. They'll say, okay, we're going to stop once they finish this particular area because it's the Anglo-Saxon layer. We think this Greek and Latin part is too hard for our younger kids. And it's really, they're talking younger, they're talking fourth and fifth grade. And I'm like, I don't think it is too hard. And in fact, it's that academic language that they need.
Sure. Because over 60% of words, once they hit fourth grade, are going to be these Latin-based words containing affixes. The percentage of words that are more than 2 syllables is really high. I can't remember the exact number right now. But what I've changed a lot, I don't know if both of you are like myself, my original training, we really weren't introducing morphology early on. Now, when I do have, and again, I only work with third grade and up, but when I do work with a third grader, we start right at that multisyllabic level within their decoding abilities. Right. So when you think about it, words like contrast and convict and insist, those are all closed syllables. So as soon as we're learning those, just circle those affixes, pre-teach that meaning. And I've totally changed the way I work with students now, because why wouldn't you bring that in? And again, I don't work with, first graders, but even with first graders, certainly you can start introducing some of the inflectional suffixes for sure.
I think that's really interesting because I keep referring back to what Melissa and I instructed. And these people who are listening, if they teach Take Flight, you said the opened, closed, and the words that end in a final E. So that could be vowel, consonant, E, or like SEZEVE type of words. Those are all those words from Greek? Those are your Greek?
Well, our Latin-based words, most of the elements tend to be open, closed, and final E syllables.
Right. So I think
not all of them, but the vast majority. Right. So why not teach those? And then the suffixes, like just the other day, I was looking through some spelling material from one of my third graders, and it had a whole list of syllables with Latin suffixes within them, right? SION, TION. Yeah. And they were labeled as challenging irregular syllables. What? Why are they doing that? I mean, yes, they're syllables. I'm not against learning. We need to know if you see TION in a Latin-based word, the T is part of the base. It's pronounced shun. But those aren't irregular. I see that and I'm like, what? So, and I think it'll be a while. I think things are kind of shifting because if we weren't taught otherwise, how else are we going to be teaching those? But I do think, why wait? Why only start at that single syllable? Maybe we should start there, but why not move more quickly into the multi-syllable?
Right. Why not introduce 2 syllable words with those 3 different patterns in it? Why not? That gives that additional. No, I'm.
And it automates their orthographically mapping. I mean, that is automating those units early on. It's that consolidated stage in the Erie. Why not help us with that a little earlier?
Yeah.
Right.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.
Hi, this is Melissa with Kids First Dyslexia Services. I am excited to share with you my private practice. Kids First Dyslexia Services is a private practice that specializes in dyslexia therapy. Each one-on-one session focuses on instruction specific to your child's needs in a nurturing environment that develops self-esteem, builds confidence, and fosters a sense of accomplishment, resulting in happier kids with higher levels of achievement. We provide a professional, personalized experience, always putting the child first. We value the relationships with both our students and parents, because strengthening skills and overcoming hurdles to achieve desired goals and success is a team effort. For more information, please visit www.kidsfirstdyslexia.com. That is www.kidsfirstdyslexia.com.
Hi, this is Amy Rodenroth, and as part of the Dyslexia Duo podcast team and owner of Discovery Dyslexia Services, I want to talk to you about my business. Our COUT-trained team offers expert virtual or in-person therapy located in Prosper, Texas, using proven dyslexia curricula like Take Flight, Build, MTA, Alphabetic Phonics, and Reading by Design. We also provide crucial independent evaluations and advocacy services. Don't wait. Empower your child today. Visit www.discovereed.com to learn more. That again is www.discoveread.com. Discovereed, covering all your dyslexia needs. Let's return to the show.
So, why is then morphology important? I know you've talked a little bit about it, and I kind of get the idea of why it would be important, but why do you believe it is important to reading and listening comprehension?
Well, and I'm an interventionist. So, the majority of the students I work with are below grade level. It's exactly that, what we talked about was taking that level of that consolidated alphabetic level and bringing it to that automaticity. And when you're looking at these elements, you're automating those in your brain. And when I first was exposed to morphology explicitly, which was like 13, 14 years ago, I didn't really get why it was so successful. All I noticed was how much it was. So I was like, oh my goodness, I've got to do this. Since then, the more I'm reading and the research and the information out there, like you were at IDA, were you able to listen to Dr. Wolf's presentation? It was the opening. Either of you? What she said was like, ding, ding, ding. That's exactly why this is. And she talked about that reading circuit. I know I listened to her podcast she did with you, and I know she talked some about morphology there as well. But it's that, we have the orthography, the semantics, the morphology, and the syntax. And all of those processes need to be addressed in our intervention, all of them. Mm-hmm. And those are going to lead to fluent reading. And it's not until we read fluently that we're able to access those words and comprehend it. So it kind of brought it all together for me, how it's leading to fluency. So really that's it. But at the same time, it's boosting vocabulary. So it's like the most, I think, with especially with our older students, it's the most impactful way that we can teach them to read and spell. Wow. And the spelling you notice early on. I think that's the first thing is like students' spelling is pretty transformed.
Yeah, for sure.
I went to a continuing education course about morphology, probably 7 years ago now. And my hand hurt. I was writing so many notes. My mind had just been blown because I wasn't trained a lot about morphology when I was going through my academic language training. I mean, if they taught it, it was just a touch on, or at least that's what I interpreted from it. But
I agree. Same. Yeah.
Yes. So when I went to this training and I learned about it, I was like, oh my gosh. And I was just blown away by how much the kids can acquire just by learning this morphology, vocabulary wise alone.
Right.
But also decoding words. So that kind of leads me to my next question. Do you have any kind of research that you've seen that shows how many more words a child can learn with morphology versus just decoding alone?
Mm-hmm. Well, one partial answer to that would be, and you've probably seen these lists. Well, there's two things. So one thing that sticks out very clearly to me is when I did my original training, it was through Wired for Reading in Seattle. And I remember her saying to us, as Laura Rogan is the instructor, and she said to us, we're going to be learning the prefixes used in, I think it was 97% of words that contain prefixes, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I tell that to my students, like that's almost all. So we're going to learn these like you know your name. You're going to learn to spell them and read them like you know your name. And that really stuck with me. And that's really true. So think about how powerful that is. Because when words get longer, it's the same prefixes and the same suffixes.
Right.
Over and over and over again. So that's going to open up a vast amount of words. And then in terms of those base elements, there's a popular list. It's like 14 base elements. They call them Latin roots. Well, actually, they call them roots because two of them are Greek. I think it's ology and graph. And the rest, the 12, are all Latin based. So those are used in over 100,000 words.
Wow.
So, and then on top of that, if you are teaching word families, it's really, really, really impactful. So that sort of answers your questions. Like just 14, if you include the 2 Greek ones, are used in over 100,000 words. And those are just the base elements. Think about all the affixes, right?
Right.
Yeah. There are statistics out there, like what percentage of words contain affixes. And that might be part of that 60%, but it's actually even higher. I think the 60%. Yeah. Anyhow, there are statistics out there that are very encouraging in terms of why we would do this. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
That's really eye-opening to me.
Yeah.
And I hope it is for other educators out there too.
Yeah.
They can really understand the benefit.
Yeah. And it's amazing. You've probably noticed this too when you talk to people like my husband, who used to teach writing in college. He's got a degree in English literature. He was like, I never thought of language this way. And parents tell me that all the time. Like, what? Like, it's just, even though we were good, like, I was always a pretty proficient speller, but I didn't think of it this way. So anyone, those majority of kids who do need that structured instruction, think of how helpful this is, right?
Yeah. Okay. So when I got my master's, and it was just not that long ago, I guess we're coming up on 10 years. I guess it was a while back.
Not that long ago, Amy.
Not long ago. Time just flies the older you get, right? I remember my capstone project was determining what was the best way to instruct in vocabulary. Was it through learning, rote memorization, or morphology? And honestly, I came up with, based on what I did with the students, it was both. It wasn't just one or the other. It was kind of a hybrid methodology since it's to support them. But what would you recommend is the best way to instruct students in morphology? Should they follow a curriculum? Probably new teachers might need to follow a curriculum, but maybe some seasoned teachers, would you kind of go according to what you see the need of the student is? How would you address that?
Well, I think for a classroom teacher, you're going to want to bring in that content, right? So you're going to be specifically choosing vocabulary related to what they're learning, I think. I mean, I'm not a classroom teacher, but so in that sense, you could be doing some of the more like the possum approach that Dr. Wolf has developed, where you're looking at, the orthography and the morphology, and then maybe some multisensory ways of some pictures and different word families are really helpful. I always recommend putting them into a word family. So you're not just looking at the word like concept. That's a tier 2 vocabulary word that's in the Cox Head list. You want to look at related words, conceptual, and then I would say involve lots of writing. Now, I'm not a classroom teacher. So what I do is I've chosen carefully. I've used those Cox Head lists. I don't know if your listeners are familiar with it. It's based out of Australia, and it's those lists of those academic, high utility, I think they call them high mileage words that you want your students to know. They base them by grade. The list I use is kind of a really long one that you want to know by the time you finish high school.
Right.
And that's how I choose my words. And in the program, so there's not a consensus on how to teach morphology or which ones to teach. And what I do, I teach about 50 or 60 of the most common Latin morphemes in our language. That's how I've developed my program. And I do explicitly teach each individual morpheme or element, however you want to call them for spelling. And then we have syntax activities around those, and spelling activities around those, and connected text activities around those. That's the program I've developed because that's the most effective way I have found to teach these. In a classroom setting, I think you could do the same thing because when you think about it, most of your vocabulary words, they're going to contain these common affixes. So that would be an opportunity to use word sums and matrices based on the classroom content.
I love the matrices. I love those. I had gotten a shirt, I think it was from IDA during Valentine's a couple of years ago, and it had loved, and it had the prefixes, beloved, beloved, beloves,
Nice.
all
Nice.
that. And I loved that. I mean, I loved that. But
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
it was great because I wore it. My kids were like, "Oh, okay, I get this." And I'm like, "Yeah, we should." Those matrices. It was mind blowing when I first saw them. All the different ways that you can use it for. So, thinking about the parents, though, because you do work with students in a private setting, how do parents support their students in this?
So the materials I have, I actually do everything interactively with my students, but there are activities like that you could send home with your students and do them at home. I see my students twice a week. And so, really, what I like to have the families at home do is really circling those affixes. And if you can't literally circle them because it's not a consumable material that you're working with, you can identify them, identify those affixes. Because as you probably notice, a lot of our kids, they get to these longer words, they either leave off the suffix, they switch the suffix, they just misread their words. They're not reading accurately. So my number one thing, and I tell this to parents too, is accuracy is our number one goal, right? That is our number one goal. So to identify these elements in the words, if you can, circle them. And then, of course, spelling practice. I'm all about spelling because when you're teaching spelling, you're teaching reading. Yes. So that would be the other thing, is having some structured spelling that the parents can give at home. And again, when you do these word sums, and you can do either the analytical ones or the synthetic ones, where you're either taking the word apart or you're putting the parts together, and have those be part of it. Because when you see a word sum or a word matrix, you're actually seeing the entire unit of the, like IVE, and then you have NESS, you're seeing the parts. And that to me is really critical. And that was what was missing originally for me when I started morphology, was those word sums.
Yeah.
Because then the students are actually seeing, and then when they have to produce their own, they have to identify when there is an E that drops, right? Or when there is a Y that turns to an I. So that way they really understand the structure, because a lot of times we drop an E, or we have to double a consonant or something. So it's really getting them to see that structure. So that would be my number one. You got to be a little careful, because if a parent's not observing you, they're not really going to know so much about that. So that would be the one thing to be careful of. But most parents, when they start seeing this, they get interested, because it's so
engaging, and it sucks you in when you see it happening in real time. You're like, oh, I can do that. I can generate these word parts with the matrix
exactly. And eventually, I would like to produce some games that I can send home, because I do games with my students, but I haven't made them available to just print out and use at home. But that's another great opportunity for practice, or to gamify it.
Well, Mary, get on it. No,
I know. Yeah, in all my free time.
You say that all the time. What free time do we have? We don't have any. We don't have any.
I've noticed too that when I have my students isolate the affix, that I always tell them it makes your base word smaller too. So it makes it easier to read your base word. The suffixes are easy to read. Once you learn those, you don't have to sound them out anymore.
Right.
But you can isolate that base word, make it easier for you to read. It looks like a much smaller word that you can digest.
Exactly.
And that really seems to help them.
Absolutely. And then when we get a little further into my progression that I do, we have base elements that have more than one form, right? Like you have MIT, MISS, right? You have PONE, POSE. And I do teach those to students because that affects spelling, right? So if you have maintain, right, and then you have maintenance, the base changes, right? So I specifically spend a lot of time on that for spelling as well. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about, but you narrow it down to that part. And then if they know, oh, it's actually the same, it's a different form of that same word, right? Maintain, maintenance, the base goes from TAIN to TEN. Just really bringing awareness to these kids, because we don't just intuitively grasp that stuff. We have, I think just really showing it. And then also like pronunciation shifts, right? As Sue always says, Sue Hageland, that spelling that remains stable, really important to know. But I find in these, these are kids that really maybe started out struggling to read, they realized pretty quickly that pre could be pre or re could be re, right? Like they're able to flex that vowel sound. So even if they hear the word preference, either they might think of the word prefer, where it kind of wakes up that vowel sound, or they're going to just know because they've practiced it so much that they know that, oh, that's the prefix pre. Because I tell them, remember, almost all the suffixes in existence. So you can be really confident when you go to spell that long word that you actually know that prefix.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that you said it wakes up that vowel, because I'm sitting there smiling going, yeah, I'm going to use it. I work with teachers, training them in a dyslexia curricula. And we were doing, and I know this is related, but not related. We were doing silent letters. We were doing Ghosts of the Departed sounds and like GN and KN and all that. They're like,
Right.
Why do we have this in our spelling if we don't say these letters? And I said, I think it was something Sue Heglin had said, is where I took it from. I said, because pronunciation changes a lot faster than the spelling does. Now, will it change later? Maybe. I don't know.
Right.
But,
Right.
we know it takes a lot longer. And I just love these kind of conversations, because I take this back to my trainees. And when they ask these questions, they'll say, this is why. Because of that. And sometimes I just go, because of God. I don't know.
Just so, but yeah, that looking into the history of the word, the origin, and it's fascinating and it's a lot to learn. I do think, speaking of like the silent letters, which aren't always silent, right? Those are like that Anglo-Saxon layer like that with all those homophones. Those are actually much harder to spell for our kids with dyslexia than the Latin level. And that is the most wonderful thing for them to realize is, oh, longer doesn't mean harder. I can do this. I know these elements. I can do this. And especially when I always do recommend starting out with word sums, because that's giving them that structure. Then we move into like reading connected text, and I want them to highlight them or identifying word families. Like, look at these words. Let's sort them into word families. But you always want to start out at that level of, I think, with the word sums, and then move into the, I guess you'd call it application activities, where it's
I need to work on matrices and word sums a little bit more, I think, with my students in my private practice than I do. I think that's a good suggestion, actually.
Yeah, and they enjoy it too. Yeah.
This completes part 1 of our interview with Mary McFarlin. Join us next week as we conclude our discussion. The Dyslexia Duo podcast hosts are Amy Rodenroth,
Melissa Dean.
Our producer is Greg Rodenroth.
You can find us on Facebook at The Dyslexia Duo.
Email us any questions or comments at thedyslexiaduo@gmail.com.
Awareness is so important. Share this podcast with your friends,
family,
and teachers.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.